against them, the Amalekites would go into villages and they would rape and burn and pillage. Leave no survivors type of thing. A desperate group, and God had warned them at that time, and warned through Moses, there would be a day of reckoning for them. And during Saul's kingship, God asked him to carry that out and to destroy them. He was to wipe them out as king, to use Israel's army to end their reign of terror once and for all, and he was not to take any of the plunder. The plunder was blood money. They had stolen from others, and they were not to keep it for themselves. Yet when Saul returned, Saul did obey, and he went and attacked the Amalekites and destroyed them. But he brought back the king, Agag, alive, and his troops brought back a lot of the plunder. And the prophet Samuel comes to confront him because God has sent Samuel to him. And here's what Samuel says to Saul. Again, this is from 1 Samuel 15. Saul, why haven't you obeyed the Lord? Why did you rush for the plunder and do what was evil in the Lord's sight? But I did obey the Lord, Saul insisted. I carried out the mission he gave me. Now, I brought back King Agag, but I destroyed everyone else. And then my troops, they were the ones who brought back the best of the sheep and the goats and the cattle and the plunder. But they did it to sacrifice it to the Lord your God in Gilgal. But Samuel replied, well, what's more pleasing to the Lord? Your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice? Listen, obedience is better than sacrifice. Submission is better than offering the fat of rams. Rebellion is just as sinful as witchcraft, and stubbornness is just as bad as worshiping idols. So because you have rejected the command of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Saul missed something. He completely misunderstood what sacrificing animals was all about. When God had commanded Moses to teach the people how to make sacrifices, the sacrifices were made as atonement for their sin. We are sinful, God is righteous. And in the sacrifice, in offering a sacrifice, it's a ritual transaction where we're demonstrating God is righteous, we're not. And this animal is dying to pay the penalty for our sins. And so when these sacrifices were made, it was to let everybody know how important the relationship was between us and God. And so he's telling Saul, so now you want to go offer sacrifices of animals, blood money, that God told you to destroy? What do you think? God just likes meat? I mean, he's a meat lover? That's what this is all about, giving him a big barbecue? Saul, to obey is what God wants, not just to offer sacrifices. And Saul had brought back the king Agag. Well, the reason that a king would bring back another king, or a tribal chieftain, or the head of these guerrillas here, was that what you would do in those days, when a king would return from battle, you would spare the life of the opposing king, whose army you had just vanquished, and you'd parade him through the streets with a ring in his nose, pulling him behind your horse. You'd ride on a horse and make him come behind you with his hands tied behind his back. It would show that you were stronger than he was. God wasn't going to get the glory, Saul was. In fact, when Samuel showed up, Saul was building a monument to himself. And so it turned out that Saul wasn't into obedience, he was into recognition. And as long as being God's man gave him recognition, that was good. But that's where the ways parted. And he wasn't going to offer sacrifices to God unless it gave the appearance that he was doing exactly what God wanted. I mean, Samuel says, well, why didn't you obey? Well, I did obey. I mean, just not completely. I mean, mostly. And I didn't bring back the cattle, the men did. Now, I led them, because, that makes me look good in the eyes of the troops. I mean, don't miss this. Saul wanted the praise of men. And God wanted somebody after his own heart. And so he had to replace Saul with David. And that brings us to point 2. Saul became insanely jealous of David and sought to kill him. If you weren't with us last week, in between this little incident with Agag and the confrontation with Samuel, there's been another confrontation. It was a confrontation between the Philistines and the Israelites. And the Philistines, who were at war with the Israelites, had a champion. He was a freak of nature. He was more than 9 feet tall. And he came out and challenged the Israelites to one-on-one combat. So I'm the biggest of the Philistines. Send out your biggest guy. Let's have a fight. Let's see who wins. Why do all of us need to fight? Well, Saul was the biggest of the Israelites, but he was afraid to fight. And so God sent David, a shepherd boy, to come and take the giant on in battle because David trusted the Lord. Saul did not. Well, David killed the giant with a sling and a stone, and the Philistines were routed because the whole army chased after them, and there was a great victory. And here's the rest of the story. This is from 1 Samuel 18. When the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David had killed the Philistine, Goliath, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. They sang and they danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. And this was their song. Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. This made Saul very angry. You think? Yeah. What's this, he said. They credit David with 10,000s and 10,000s and me with only thousands. Next they'll be making him their king. And so from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Saul became afraid of David, for the Lord was with David and had turned away from him. And he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Saul became insanely jealous. He recognized that David was doing things the way the Lord wanted, and the Lord was blessing him. In fact, in that little paragraph, there are a couple of sections there with dots. When David had killed the giant and people started praising him, Saul became worried that he might become too powerful and one day decide to be king. And so even though he was very young, Saul put him in command of troops and sent him out to battle. He thought to himself, well, the Philistines will do my dirty work for me. I mean, he got lucky with a slingshot, but he's not going to survive all these skirmishes. But every time he sent David out, David would win victory after victory, and soon he became a great leader in the army. And everybody respected him more and more. One of Saul's daughters even fell in love with David and wanted to marry him, and Saul thought, well, this is great. And so, David said, he offered David his daughter's hand in marriage, and David said, well, I can't be the son-in-law of a king. I don't have any money for a dowry, and that was important in those days. And Saul said, all I want are the scalps, basically, scalps of 100 Philistines. You bring those scalps, and we're even. And David brought back 200. And Saul became more afraid of him by the day. But instead of coming to his senses and saying, hey, God must be blessing this young man, I can't argue against God, Saul became so jealous that his thoughts became twisted, and he started contemplating murder. And there's a warning in here in your outline. Jealousy is a gateway sin. Don't miss this. It's a gateway sin that opens us up to many other sins and evil desires. James says this, for wherever there is jealousy and selfish ambition, there you will find disorder and evil of every kind. I mean, see, if you and I start getting jealous of someone, and we can say, well, okay, I'm jealous of someone, but it doesn't hurt anybody. I mean, I should have been the one getting that promotion. I deserve a house better than they have. That should be me in that leadership position. I mean, I'm not hurting anybody by thinking that, except for the fact that my thoughts go from thinking those things to becoming bitter about those things to taking action, and now I'm saying things about these people behind their back. Or maybe I'm even doing things to subvert them. There have been people who've killed because of jealousy. Saul was one of those people. The more he tried to put David in a place where he would be exposed to danger and be killed, the more God blessed him, protected him, and caused him to rise to success. And so Saul decided he had to end David's life once and for all. And so he set out to kill him. And David became a fugitive and ran for his life. There were others who joined David, people who owed money and people who were in trouble with the law for other things. And so David became kind of like a Robin Hood with a couple hundred merry men. They went and found a place on the west side of the Dead Sea where there were a lot of caves, and there was a natural spring over there where they'd get some water, and they went and hid in these caves. And Saul went looking for him. He had heard that they were close to a place called En-Gedi. And this is now from 1 Samuel chapter 24. Saul chose 3,000 elite troops from all Israel and went to search for David and his men near the rocks of the wild goats. At that place where the road passes some sheepfolds, Saul went into a cave to relieve himself. That's not a typo. That really happened. They used the bathroom in those days just like today. Okay? So Real story. He got off the interstate, and there was no, rest area. Okay, so that's what happened. Went into a cave to relieve himself. But as it happened, David and his men were hiding further back in that very cave. Now, I've been to the Holy Land one time, and there are these limestone cliffs next to the Dead Sea that have been carved out over the centuries and by water erosion and other things. Some of those caves, they say, are huge enough to hold 1,000 people. And so it's very possible. This story is incredibly realistic. You see the place, the cliffs look like honeycombs. There's caves all over the place. So David and his men are hiding in this cave. Saul and his men come searching. Saul says, hey, wagons ho, I need to take care of some business, and he walks in the cave. As it happens, he goes into the very cave where David and his men are hiding, and they see him come in. The story continues. Now's your opportunity, David's men whispered to him. Today, the Lord is telling you, I'll certainly put your enemy into your power to do with as you wish. I mean, they're leaning over and saying, David, that's Saul. You got him. Look, he's taking his sword off. This has to be something the Lord's giving you. Go kill him now. He's coming to kill you. So David crept forward and cut off a piece of the hem